Welcome to our Wednesday night small group on the I am statements of Jesus. We're in a 6-week study of the 7 I am statements in John's Gospel, where Jesus is using the I am statements to identify himself with God the Father. So far we've done 2. The first week we looked at John chapter 6, and this is the first of the I am statements. And I would remind you that when we talk about the I am statements, the I am is capitalized because it is the name that God gave to Moses at the burning bush. It's God's covenant, personal name that the Jews were so afraid of using in violation of the second commandment that they put all kinds of hedges around it and basically refused to say it. So instead they would use other names meaning God, but Jesus used the I am as a way of identifying himself with God the Father. So it's chapter 6 of John opens. We find Jesus feeding the 5,000 on the mountainside. 5,000 men, not counting the men and women. That particular miracle is the only one other than the resurrection which appears in every gospel. After that, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John have Jesus walking on the water to greet the disciples on the Sea of Galilee in the midst of a storm. And then they make it to Capernaum, which was his home base while he was ministering in Galilee. And it was there that he was met or was found by the crowds that had been fed the day before, and they got into a discussion about material things versus spiritual things. The people were concerned about were concerned about material bread, and Jesus wanted them to realize that he was the spiritual bread of life. And that's where the first I am statement comes in. I am the bread of life. Then we went on to John chapter 7, and we find that Jesus has moved from Capernaum. He's down in Jerusalem now, and he's taking part in the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of the Booths. And in that particular ceremony, festival, there were 2 things that were kind of significant in that festival. One was dealing with water, in that it was a remembrance of God providing water while the children of Israel were wandering in the desert. And I mentioned, I think, last week when we talked about it, it kind of reminds me of his experience with the woman at the well in Samaria, where he said that he was the living water. And then the I am statement, though, has to do with light. And we talked a little bit about one of the parts of the ceremony is at night they would light the menorahs on the towers of the courtyard, and it would light up the temple so that the people below in Jerusalem could see the light of God up on the hillside. And this is where Jesus, in that setting, proclaimed, I am the light of the world. So far we've seen 2 I am statements. One, I am the bread of life. I am the one who is going to give you the spiritual nourishment that you need in order to be part of the family of God. And then he says, I am the light, which is the one who's going to lead you to God. Because if you remember, God used a light to guide the children of Israel through their wanderings as they left Egypt, going to the promised land. So, bread for spiritual nourishment, light to find out the way to God. And tonight, we're going to look at 2 other ones. First one is, I am the gate. And the second one is, I am the good shepherd. So, think with me for a minute back to the time of Jesus and the ancient Middle East. Bethlehem of Judea, and remember there are 2 Bethlehems. We talked about this on Sunday morning a while back. There was one in the north and there's one in the south. This is the Bethlehem down around Judea, south of Jerusalem. But that Bethlehem has been there, that town has been there probably over 3,500 years. And it's such a small, insignificant place that if you look in the Old Testament and they list the cities in Judah, many times it doesn't show up. That's how insignificant it was in the Old Testament times. However, we know that in the New Testament times it takes on great significance because that's where the incarnation occurred. But why was Bethlehem so significant in what Jesus is about to say? I am the gate, I am the good shepherd. What's significant about it is the area around Bethlehem was ideal for shepherds. If you remember in the Christmas story, who did the angels go to on the hillside outside of Bethlehem?
The shepherds.
Shepherds. Well, why are the shepherds there? Because it's good grazing land. There are good places there to move the flocks, to give them food. And there's also lots of caves that can serve as safety places for the sheep at night and also in bad weather. Because sheep are skittish. If there's a storm, you don't want them out on the hillside. They'll run off. So they're able to put them into the caves and keep them safe from storms, but also put them into caves to keep them safe from anybody who's trying to steal them. So in chapter 10, Jesus used the idea of shepherds as a way to, again, identify himself with God the Father. But we're not going to start with chapter 10. We're going to start with chapter 9. Because you need the background of chapter 9 that kind of gets set up for chapter 10. So I'm going to just kind of give you an outline for chapter 9. So if you've got your Bibles, look at John chapter 9. In the Holman edition, mine is titled The Sixth Sign, Healing a Man Born Blind. And if you look at it in John 9, verses 1 to 5, we find that Jesus finds a blind man who has been blind from birth, and he has a theological discussion with his disciples. The theological discussion was, who sinned that he was blind? Did his parents do it, or did he do it? Because then, if you had a physical ailment, it was because you sinned. You had a spiritual sin that caused a physical ailment. So the question was, did he sin or did his parents sin? Why was he blind? And Jesus was very quick to answer. 5 verses is all it took. And some of that was setting it up. But the answer was neither. He was blind in order for God's glory to be shown as I'm going to heal him. And then in verses 6 through 12, Jesus actually, in fact, heals the man. Now, how does he heal him? We talked a little bit, I think, Sunday morning. Sunday morning and Wednesday nights kind of merge together with me sometimes. But I think we talked Sunday morning. If not, we will talk on a Sunday morning. Jesus had various ways that he was able to heal somebody. Some he touched. Some he just spoke a word. In this particular case, he made mud with his spit and rubbed it on the man's eyes and told him to go wash in the pool, and his eyesight was restored. So 6 through 12 is the actual healing. Wonderful story. Things are going great. In verses 13 to 23, we find things take a twist. Because everybody's astonished that he can see again. So they take him to the Pharisees. They take him to the religious leaders who question him on how did this happen? Who healed you? And they can't come to a conclusion. So they call in his parents. Was he in fact born blind? Or is he faking? Is this all a scam? And they said, nope, he was born blind. So how is he healed? Well, his parents kind of dodged the question. He's an adult, ask him. And the man again says, Jesus healed me. And that was not an answer they were looking for. And then continual questioning him. And then towards the end of chapter 9, he is thrown out of the synagogue. Then Jesus, in 35 through the end of the chapter, Jesus finds him and tells him that he is the Messiah by using messianic terminology. And the man falls down and worships him. And then we get to chapter 10. And here we have some disagreement. Some people say that this discourse that Jesus is going to have in chapter 10, verses 1 through 14, are a continuation of the discussion he has just had with the man in the temple. You know, he's had this discussion with a guy that was cured of blindness, and some Bible scholars say that what happens next is Jesus continuing that discussion. Others say, no, it happened later. It don't matter. Simple answer, it don't matter. This is another discussion. So we are now into chapter 10. We're going to look at chapter 10, verses 1 to 6 to start with. So, Sandy S., would you read 1 to 6 in chapter 10?
Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice.
Okay.
Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them.
Okay. Jesus sets up a very common occurrence. He talks about shepherds. Everybody in the crowd, Pharisee or not, would have understood the picture that he was drawing. Because, again, when you needed to have sheep controlled, you needed to have them safe where they couldn't be stolen, you found a cave, you put your sheep in the cave, and you put a hedge around the entrance where there was only one way in and one way out. If you didn't have a cave, then you built a pen with bushes and boulders, and again, so there's only one way in and one way out. And somebody was the gatekeeper. It could have been one of the shepherds, it could have been somebody else whose job was simply to be the gatekeeper, because you only wanted the shepherds to go in, because the sheep would follow their shepherd. He would not follow somebody else. You notice at the end in verse 4 and 5, the sheep know the voice of the shepherd. So it's like, you know, if you have a pet and you call your pet cat, maybe not a cat, but dogs.
It works for cats too.
It works for cats too. I know, I've had some cats that are very stubborn. They won't come.
Oh, well, no, but they know it's you.
They know it's you. But they know the voice of the
Kinda
master.
like a kid.
They know who it is. So they would come to the voice that was calling them. If they were not part of that flock, they wouldn't come. So having set up the stage, Jesus now issues the I am statement. Connect 7 through 10.
Therefore Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.
Okay, verse 7 says, so Jesus said again, I assure you, or if you have an NIV, it says very truly. Basically, in the Greek, when you see I assure you, or very truly, or very verily, it's like a teacher going, or, you know, pounding the blackboard. Do they still use blackboards? Pounding the blackboard. Hey guys, this is important. Pay attention. So Jesus is getting the attention of those around him, which would have included scribes and Pharisees. Because if he's teaching in the temple, which is the kind of the implication here, they would have been there. Because they're looking for a reason to catch him. So not only the crowds, but the scribes and the Pharisees, he's saying, pay attention to what I'm about to say. And then he says, I am, in the whole one says, I am the door of the sheep,
The gate for the sheep.
or
The gate.
a gate. Either word works there depending on your translation. What's important to notice is the pronoun at the beginning of the statement. The pronoun says, I am the gate, not you, not the crowd. I am the gate, or I am the door of the sheep.
This isn't capitalized, though.
Is what?
This isn't capitalized, this I am.
Throughout the Old New Testament, I don't think it's ever capitalized.
Okay,
I think I said last week or the week before, I wished it was. You go back to Genesis with Moses,
is,
and it is
yeah.
capitalized. But it would have been understood as I am being a reference to deity. But yeah, I think I said last week or maybe the week before, I wished it was, because it would have stood out then
it's confusing.
as to what he was saying. But the point I'm trying to make, at least in this first verse, is that Jesus is saying, I am the gate. I am the door. I am the access to the sheep pen. It's exclusive. There's not another way. I am it. Then he says, all who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. Okay. Very important here. All who came before me does not, capital letters N-O-T, does not refer to the Old Testament prophets. He's not calling the Old Testament prophets thieves and robbers. Who he is calling thieves and robbers are the scribes and the Pharisees, who are the current religious leaders. He's saying, you guys are false shepherds. We're going to see here in a few minutes, we're going to look at a couple of verses back in the Old Testament, where the prophets themselves called the religious leaders of Judah in their day false shepherds. So, just again, not the prophets, but the religious leaders. But the sheep didn't listen to them. Well, in the Old Testament they did, and it got them in trouble. Verse 9 says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. If you look at that, and then you go back again and look up at verse 7, it kind of says the same thing. We did a study, gosh, it's been a couple of years ago, if you'll remember, when we spent 6 weeks or so looking at the Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. Jesus was a master teacher. And a teacher knows that if you say something at least twice, they might remember it. So one thing you'll find in Jewish literature and throughout the New Testament is things are said more than once, because it wants it to sink in. It wants it to get stuck in your brain, earworm, if you will, in your brain, so that you remember it. So verse 9 says, I am the door. Again, if you enter by me, you will be saved and will go in and come out and find pasture. Notice it says, if. If you come in through my gate, that being Jesus himself, then you will find pasture. You will find the kingdom of heaven. You will find God the Father. But the only way to do that is to come in through me. Verse 10 says, and a thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it in abundance. Depending on your translation, the NIV, I think, has a little bit better translation of this verse, because instead of saying have it in abundance, the NIV says have it to the full, which I think is a personal opinion, a better translation of the Greek from what I have read. But you can take either one. It still works.
Okay, what chapter and verse are you on?
Chapter 10, that was
10.
verse 10.
Okay.
The end of verse 10 says, I have come to may have life and have it in abundance, or have it to the full, depending on your translation. So, Jesus as the gate is the one who provides access to God. He serves as the gate, which is the protection of the sheep. Remember when we started out, we talked about how the gatekeeper would lay in front of the door to keep thieves out, to keep anybody but the shepherds from getting inside. So Jesus says, I am the gate, simply means he is the one who's there to protect believers. He is the way in, and he is the protection. And then he goes on, beginning in verse 11, we find his second I am statement. So 11 to 14. Bert, would you read those? 11 to 14.
I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me.
Okay. 11 starts off, I am the good shepherd. Now, we're going to come back to that because we're going to look at a couple of Old Testament verses here in a minute where the prophets have foretold that God is going to send a good shepherd to take care of his flock, Israel. In the end, we get to the New Testament, that good shepherd is one who takes care of all of humanity, not just Israel. It says the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The word good there in the Greek can have a couple of references. It can have the reference talking about good as in good appearance. But here in context, what he's really talking about is moral good, the good to take care of others. Verse 12, the hired man, since he's not the shepherd, doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf. He has no connection to the sheep. He's there for a job. The shepherd, on the other hand, if it's his flock, think of David in the Old Testament, killing the lion, killing the bear. He protected the flock because he had an interest in the flock. Well, Jesus is saying here that as the good shepherd, he has a connection to each and every believer. And in fact, as we get to the end of John, does in fact lay down his life for the flock. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me. The word know here means a very close, ongoing relationship. Not simply saying, okay, you look like one of mine. Oh, you look like one of mine. No, the word here in the Greek simply means I've got a close connection. Just like the shepherd can call the sheep and they'll come because they know his voice, Jesus says, my flock will come because they know my voice. I have a connection with them. Now, calling himself the good shepherd, not a surprise, would have gotten the scribes and the Pharisees in a tizzy. Because, guess what? Just like I am, that's another reference to the Messiah. So if we look in the Old Testament, there are a couple of verses we're going to go to where the Old Testament prophets talk about a good shepherd that God is going to send. So, give you a few minutes. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 34. Ezekiel 34. I may have more trouble than you are finding it.
I think they took it out of my Bible.
No, it's there. My pages stick together.
Page 842.
What page is it? I'll
It's
see if
between
on my-
Lamentations and Daniel.
There it is.
Thanks.
Ezekiel chapter 34. And this is Ezekiel basically describing the religious leaders of Judah at the time as being poor shepherds. Throughout the Old Testament, Israel is described as God's flock. There's other descriptions in there too. You know, it's God's vineyard, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks when we talk about his statement, I am the true vine. But he's also talked about many times as the flock of God. At the beginning of chapter 34, Ezekiel, speaking for God, talks about how poor the shepherds have been. But Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 23, has the reference to the shepherd God's going to send. So Ezekiel 34, verse 23, in the Holman says, I will appoint over them a single shepherd, my servant David, and he will shepherd them. He will tend them himself and will be their shepherd. He's not talking about David being the shepherd, but he's talking about a descendant of David being the shepherd, which would have been a reference again to the Messiah, because the Messiah was supposed to have come from the bloodline of King David. So that would have been the first thing that those that knew the scriptures would have gotten upset about. And then we work over to Micah 5:2. Is the other one we're going to look at. Micah 5:2. And we're going to look at 2 and 3 and 4. So Micah 5:2 says, Bethlehem, Ephratah, you are small among the clans of Judah. One will come for you to be a ruler over Israel for me. His origins is from antiquity and from eternity. And then in verse 4 it says, he will stand and shepherd them in the strength of Yahweh, in the majestic name of Yahweh his God. They will live securely, for then his greatness will extend to the ends of the earth. Verse 2 is what the chief priest told King Herod when the wise men came looking for the new king. This was the Messiah was to come from Bethlehem. But then notice in verse 4, this new Messiah, this new king, was to be the shepherd, not only of Israel, but notice it will extend to the ends of the earth. He would be the shepherd for all mankind, not just for the Jews. So the two prophecies in both Ezekiel and Micah look at different aspects of the Messiah. In one place he talks about him coming to be the shepherd of Israel, and then in Micah he talks about him being the shepherd of the entire world. By calling himself the Good Shepherd, the scribes and the Pharisees would have immediately understood, not only is he claiming divinity with I am, he's claiming to be the shepherd that God's going to send. So both of them would have been messianic prophecies, and they would have recognized that he's claiming to be the deliverer that God is sending. He's speaking language that they would understand. Would they act on it? No. But they would understand it. They would understand what he was claiming. But when we look at those two together, we find I am the bread, I am the spiritual life of the believer. I am the light that leads you to salvation. I am the gate or the single access that allows you entrance into the God's kingdom. And then I am the shepherd who protects you from those who would do you harm. So you kind of see how they kind of build on each other.
Mm-hmm.
So next week we're going to look at another I am statement. And next week we have an interesting one, because we have now gone from spiritual food to light to find God, protection and entrance into heaven. And next week, it's Lazarus. And I am the resurrection and the life.
Mm-hmm.
So I am the one who gives you the eternal life after you enter my kingdom. But that's next week.
For the rest of the story.
Or the rest of the story, yeah.
And where do we find that?
Next week, you have to wait.
Next week, that's about chapter 11 or 12, something like that. That's next week. Comments? Questions? Anything you want to add?
One thing, you were saying that the Pharisees and all of them were on his case because he had healed the blind man.
Mhm.
But then part of that said, part of the reason they were upset was because he did it on the Sabbath.
Yep. That was part of it.
Yeah. And that was, you know,
Part of it was the fact that he did it on the Sabbath, and then part of it was because the blind man says to them, he's a prophet. Do you want to follow him too?
I missed that part, okay.
That's why he gets thrown out of the synagogue.
That would
Is
be-
he kind of chides the religious leaders that this guy is a prophet. He may be the Messiah. You know, I'm putting words in his mouth. He may be the Messiah. Do you want to follow him? And they jump down his throat and throw him out of the synagogue.
That would be like a red flag to a bull.
Yep, that's a red flag to a bull. Yep. But again, his terminology and what he does, you think about what we're doing in Matthew on Sunday mornings, teaching, preaching, and healing. Instruction, guidance, miracles, all things that the Old Testament said, this is what the Messiah is going to do. Can't you see this? No, because he threatens my position.
They didn't want to
And
shoot.
that's what it really came down to. Anybody else?
I like those I am statements are all coming together. They were always separate before. They didn't, but the way you blend them together where they build on each other is really good.
Well, thank you.
That's good.
I've tried to do that. Is what,
That would be Lifeway.
Oh.
That would be
no,
Lifeway.
actually,
Quit taking it
Vivian,
away
that's
from
me,
James.
because Lifeway, the book I'm using, it's not Lifeway, it's Rose, but they do not build on them.
Yeah,
They
it's-
treat them as separate
Okay.
things.
It's-
But I see them as building on each other.
It's really.
Because we do the resurrection,
Makes
and then,
it-
I forget what the next one is. The last one is I am the vine, which is connection in for growth. I think they do build on each
But the
other.
way they blend is so,
But I like
it's really excellent.
The book I'm using doesn't say, Lifeway may, I haven't looked at a Lifeway
I don't know,
book.
never mind.
But the
I'm not-
one I'm
I'm
using
searching.
for the
It's
Rose
in a
Bible
life.
study, which is where I'm getting some of the material, does
That's
not
that's our job.
build them together, but I think they do build together.
Well, it seems like they do.
So,
How
are they
amazing,
being misbehaving?
how amazing that that would happen in the Bible, that all these things
That
would
it all
build
kind of went
together. You know,
together.
what a coincidence.
Yeah, what a coincidence.
Yeah,
And if you remember back,
It's built.
been several years, we looked at Jesus and Genesis.
uh-huh.
Genesis to Revelation, it's all the story of Jesus. Many of the things we've done in the Old Testament, it all comes together.
But we don't always notice that as we go
Nope.
through.
Nope.
You have to,
We're sometimes like the Pharisees, and it goes over our heads.
absolutely.
Not that we're Pharisees, hopefully. Let's close with prayer, and then we'll get home before it gets too much. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this study tonight. We thank you for how the I am statements that tell us about your identity do build on each other and do all merge together, because they're all part of your identity as God the Son. We thank you for that. We ask that you would watch over us as we go through the rest of this week. Particularly ask for your watch care and blessing this weekend with the extremely cold weather and the possibility of snow. We just ask that everybody would be safe and that they would be in your house if possible, and to know when it's not to stay home. Again, we just thank you for your care for us, for we ask it in your name. Amen.
Amen.